and the first lecture will be on this electrostatic in a weak gravitational field. And there are slight change in the schedule. The second lecture, which was supposed to begin at 3:30, will now begin at 2:30. So please note that. You might be interested to hear that one also. So instead of 3:30 in the afternoon, the second lecture today will begin at 2:30.
Okay. So, as I warned you, as the talks progress, it is going to become more and more technical, and unless you sit and do the algebra, it will all go away. Okay, so if you are seriously interested, you should follow it up as each lecture goes. So today I want to talk about something which is very beautiful research in GR and electrostatics, which has not been noticed. I mean, in bits and pieces it exists in literature, but it has not been sort of nicely delineated, and this is what we did in this paper. So I want to talk about that research. So in order to motivate this result, there are two ways of looking at it. One way of looking at it will come through as I go through the slides, but the other way, let me just describe to you in words. Suppose I have a source of light here in this gravitational field, and I send light rays from this source of light. Okay, they will all, light rays are radially going out in the radius of light. If there was no gravitational field, they are all going to be straight lines. Now I replace this bulb by an electric charge. Okay, electric charge equilibrium. Then we also know that the field lines are going to be radially directed along. So you might as well say that the field lines are somewhat like photon paths, because if I had the light rays and photons are traveling radially out, the electric field lines are exactly like these, and they are also going in the straightforward. So obviously the next question to ask is, what happens if I switch on a weak gravitational field? So if I now do this in Earth's surface, actually a light source here on Earth's surface, we know that the light rays are going to be bent. Light rays are not going to go in straight lines, but they are going to be bent by this Earth's gravitational field, which is acting down. And you can compute that. This is standard GR calculation. The interesting question to ask is, now suppose I replace that bulb by a charge. So I am now putting a charge on the top of this disk or something in Earth's gravitational field, and I can compute the electric field line. Does that equivalence still hold? That is, the fact that the paths followed by the light rays and the path followed by the electric field line, they are identical in the absence of gravitation. Are they identical in the presence of the gravitation? There is no a priori reason to believe that these two things should be the same. And in general, if you take a very strongly curved background, etc., it turns out it is not the same. But for the weak gravitational field, to the lowest order in the gravitational field, or in a case which is known as a Rindler frame, there is a uniformly accelerated frame, these two things happen to be the same. And that is a remarkable result. And what is more, both the null geodesic, the light rays path, and the electric field line happens to be just parts of circles. So it is not only that they are curved in some kind of a simplest possible way, they just become circles. Okay, so this is one of the results which I want to show you. And on the way, you will learn a lot of things about Rindler frames and how to manipulate some VR quantities, etc. That is the motivation. Now there is another aspect which I wanted to discuss. So when I am doing this, I have to do all these Maxwell's equation in a generally going form, and what happens in a static charge. And it also allows you to give a very nice interpretation for the standard electromagnetic radiation, which falls as 1 by R and is proportional to charge, etc., etc. And there is a very nice way of understanding that by this analogy, which also I will explain. Okay. There is an alternate motivation for the same problem, which if you think about it, you will find that it is a bit strange that people have not already considered. So let me try to explain that. So this is a space-time diagram, and you have a charge moving with some velocity in a straight line. So we are interested in the field, electromagnetic field at this point, and I draw a 45-degree line to connect to this. So one thing which we know is that the electromagnetic field at that point is always related to the source at this point, because things propagate along the null cone in electromagnetic radiation. Green's function is a delta of S square. So it only depends on the behavior here. How do we solve this problem? I mean, there are several ways of solving this problem. We are asking for what is the electromagnetic field of a uniformly moving charge. Of course, the simplest way is that you Lorentz transform this to a frame T prime x prime where the charge is at rest. The charge is at rest at one point. Then you compute this and then you Lorentz, this is just a Coulomb field because you are sitting in a static system. So you know what this field is and you transform it back and you get it. Now I want to go a bit further. What about an arbitrarily moving charge particle? Now, if you look at the textbooks, they all do the Coulomb field of a moving charge by this trick. And then they will go into Leonard-Weichart potential, the derivatives, all kinds of things, in order to find the field of an arbitrarily moving charge. But we could have done exactly the same thing. First thing which we know is that from Maxwell's equation, the divergence of the FAB is given by this JB, which is the current, and the JB of course depends on T and X, and the metric is just flat because we are working in the flat space-time. I can now do a general coordinate transformation so that this charge is at rest. Make sure you understand that. Just as when a particle was moving along uniform velocity, you did a Lorentz transformation and you made the charge at rest. But if the particle is moving along some arbitrary curve, I don't care. I will ride along with the particle. So I choose a coordinate system in which the charged particle is at rest, which is exactly what happens here. In that, I have the field point and the source point, but the 45-degree null ray will now get distorted because we are now sitting in a coordinate system which has an arbitrary metric, because the metric which comes because you have moved to the rest prime of this is a curvilinear coordinate. The transformation is not an inertial transformation, it is a general coordinate transformation. So the Maxwell's equation, which was like this, now becomes like this. The current now doesn't depend on x. You see here it doesn't depend on time. You see here the current depends on time because it is in some crazy trajectory. But here current is static. But after all, there has to be time dependent. Where is that time dependent? That time dependence goes into the metric. The metric in an arbitrary coordinate system will be time. So there is already a very beautiful equivalence you can see. The time dependence of the current and the time dependence of the electromagnetic field and all the complications of the Leonard-Weichart potential and the field of an arbitrarily moving charge is now coming from the fact that you have a general curvilinear coordinate system in which metric is time dependent. The charge is sitting quietly here. So what we are now talking about is that you have a space-time with a crazy metric. It is still flat space-time, but it is a crazy metric. Then I have a charge which is not moving here. Charge is sitting quietly. Because the metric is time dependent, this FAB acquires a time. So this is the problem we want to solve. And then we can always translate. This solution is not easy, but if we can solve that, we can transform it. Now what I did long back with at that time he was a student, now he is a faculty member in Delhi with Abhinav Gupta. This is a PhD paper in '98. Is that we found a trick to solve this problem by this method. And that trick is related to what I am going to talk about, that the electrostatic field in a weak gravitation. Okay, I am not going to talk about this paper, which if you are interested you can go and take a look at it. But this is a motivation for what I am going to do today. What you notice is that if you have this arbitrarily moving charge and a field point and a source point, if you take the box of FAB, okay, then you will find that it depends on dA of JB minus dB of JB. This is often not done and I never understood why. I mean, if you write A mu is equal to box A mu is equal to J mu, and if you differentiate that through, then you can write box F mu nu equal to something which involves this quantity. What it immediately tells you is that the field at this point can only depend on the position of the charge, velocity of the charge, and the acceleration of the charge. Because J is linear in velocity, if I take a derivative, it will pick you acceleration, but it cannot give you time derivative of the acceleration. So you already have a simple result. that the field at this point of an arbitrarily moving charge can depend on the position of the charge at the source point, velocity of the charge at the source point, and acceleration of the charge at the source point, but nothing else. It cannot depend on further derivatives of the position. That gives you an idea. This is where the trick is based on. So you have this red line, the charge, whose field we want to compute. Suppose you find another charge which has this green trajectory, okay, which is constructed in such a way that its position, velocity, and acceleration matches with this charge here. You can always do that. It is just a oscillating circuit which you just make it touch that. And suppose I compute the field due to this green charge, but then the field due to the red charge has to be identical. For the simple reason that only the position, velocity, and acceleration comes into L, the field at that point, and they are identical for both of them. So you replace this charge by a hypothetical uniformly accelerated charge, and in fact it needs to be uniformly accelerated only around this region. I mean, we don't care what it looks like. So you replace it by a uniformly accelerated charge, and you compute the field of that. That would be identical to your Lenard-Wishart potential. Okay. So the problem has been now reduced to going to a rest frame of this uniformly accelerated charge. I told you that the trick is to go to the rest frame of this, solve the problem, and then come back. Right? So I want to go to the rest frame of a uniformly accelerated charge. A uniformly accelerated charge is like a constant gravitational field. So I want to know what is the electromagnetic field of a charged particle sitting quietly in a constant gravity. That is what we want to say. So this is the second motivation for looking at this problem.
Yes, what is this acceleration and what is the value of this uniform acceleration?
This acceleration should exactly match with the acceleration of the red charge at this point.
Okay, so that's
Yeah.
the only.
That is the only criterion.
Oscillating sum.
Oscillating?
Oscillating.
Oscillating circle. That is, you take this curved circle and you connect it with a curve here where the tangent and the curvature matches,
Yes.
which you can always do. Okay? And then you freeze that acceleration and go to that frame. And then you know everything. And once you have computed it, you are. Okay. So, as I said, this is only a tool. I mean, we are not interested in the field of a uniformly accelerated charge. We are interested in the field of the red charge. But what we have argued is that this is the only clever point of the paper. That we have argued is that can be replaced by this, and if I know this, we know everything. And there I can go to the rest frame. So you have this uniformly green charge here, the uniformly accelerating charge, and this is the field we want to. First you clean up a little bit. You sort of move the coordinate system so that it is at your end. Then you rotate the coordinate system so that it sort of smoothly touches here, and you take this. Okay. So this rotation and this thing are generally covariant transformation. That changes nothing, and you want to calculate this field. So you have this uniformly accelerated charge, and you want this field. So we are now going to transform. So this is the problem we want to solve. This is inertial frame. You transform to a uniformly accelerated frame. So in a uniformly accelerated frame, this charge is quietly sitting here, and the 45-degree line gets distorted, and you want to solve it. Because I told you that this is the philosophy. You want to ride with the charge and solve your Maxwell's equation. But riding with an arbitrarily moving charge is very difficult. So what you realize is that you don't have to do that. You only want to ride with a uniformly accelerated charge. And you go to this uniformly accelerated frame where the charge is at rest, and you find this FAB for a static charge in this Rindler frame. That turns out to be easy. It has been done by many people before me, and you can just pick it up and then you transform back, and you will be able to get your Lenard-Wishart potential. Okay? So this is exactly in the spirit of how we do your Coulomb field calculation, etc. But in particular, this requires looking at the field of a charged particle near the surface of the Earth, sitting in the table on the surface of the Earth, because that is uniformly accelerated with respect to the Freely particle. So I want to introduce to you this Rindler frame concept, which of course plays a role in several things, and in fact it will even come up in tomorrow in my talk. So what do? First you want to transform to a frame which is uniformly accelerated with respect to inertial observer. And there is a very standard way by which these coordinates can be introduced, and it turns out that the inertial coordinates and the accelerated coordinates. Accelerated coordinates are small x and small t, inertial coordinates are capital X and capital T, and this is the coordinate transformation. This is written in such a way that when g goes to 0, capital T will match with small t and capital X will match with small x. Okay? So the observer at x is equal to 0, for example, will travel in a hyperbolic trajectory like this in the inertial time, and g will be the acceleration. If the metric, once you know this coordinate transformation, you can find the metric in that frame. It can be written in very many different ways. This is the standard form if you just do this. And when g goes to 0, it will go to standard inertial coordinates. But if you are not really bothered about g going to 0 limit, you might as well translate this and call this as g x bar. So that it is g x bar whole square dx bar square. Okay. And if you are accelerating in some arbitrary direction, gx will get replaced by g dot r and d as well. I will also use the notation that this quantity is some n, which is called the elapsed function in general. So it is only the elapsed function which is non-trivial particularly. Now I want to first find out the null duration, because I wanted to say that I told you that the light rays path in this and the electric field lines are going to be the same. So we want to know how light rays propagate. If you want to calculate the trajectory of anything, massive particle, light rays, whatever, in a curved spacetime or in an arbitrary metric, the sharpest route is to just write down the Hamilton-Jacobi. So this is just the Hamilton-Jacobi equation for a massless particle, which is like a photon. And you want to solve this. We are looking at the z equals xy plane, z equals 0 plane, and because by symmetry you can just rotate it around. And things depend on this x bar. So you need a non-trivial function here, but you can separate variables on time and y-axis. This is the standard trick in Hamilton-Jacobi equation. You plug it in and you solve, it is fairly easy. So this was actually done by these two gentlemen, and we sort of rediscovered it. So you get this result, which is just the equation to a circle. So the first surprising result or interesting result is that the null geodesics, if you send a beam of light, if I just shoot this laser pointer here, you think it is going in a straight line. It is not going in a straight line, but actually it is going in an arc of a circle. It could have gone in some crazy trajectory, but it is actually going in an arc of a circle because the Earth's gravitational field is approximately constant in this region. So you have that, and its radius is decided by the energy and the y component of the moment. So here is a picture. If you send out beams of light from here, this is how it will be. And the x bar is equal to 0 is the horizon, because there is a region beyond which you can't see in a uniformly accelerated. There is one more result which I need, which some of you may not quite know, so let me explain that. If I am thinking about a material body which is moving, then you will use xi of tau, where tau is the proper time, to parameterize that curve. So if I have a material body which is moving in some crazy trajectory, you say that there is a clock attached to it, and the time shown by that clock is the proper time. And if I know the position of the particle as a function of that proper time, then everything else is fine. Yeah. But if the particle is traveling at the speed of light, you can't attach a clock to it, and there is no such thing as a proper time. This gets replaced by a notion of something called an affine parameter. Okay? So the affine parameter is defined such that the null geodesic here will satisfy this equation, which is the parallel transport equation for the tangent vector of the null geodesic. And the null geodesic is defined as dxi by d lambda, where lambda is the affine parameter. So you would also like to compute the affine parameter for this curve, which can be done. This is straightforward exercise in GR, and it will turn out to be 1 by g tan HL. That I need later. Now let us go to Maxwell's equations in a generally covariant form. So if you have a spacetime with some metric, you have this as the Maxwell's equation. But we want to do something slight, and the force on a charge is given by the standard Lorentz force equation. We want to do something slightly better. We want to actually have a definition of electric and magnetic. Now, this is often not emphasized, that you usually think of electric and magnetic fields as the components of this two forms, so to speak. So it is the FIK, which is an antisymmetric tensor with two indices. But there is a slightly nicer way of defining it. After all, what is electric and what is magnetic is going to depend on the observer. Even in standard electromagnetism, you make a Lorentz transformation, electric field will become magnetic. So what you do is that you take an observer with a 4 velocity ui and define a 4 vector which is uj dotted with this. Okay, and this will just be the electric field, because if you go to the rest prime of this observer, it will pick up actually Fi0, which is your electric. So this is a generally covariant definition of electric field as a component of a 4 vector. And similarly, you can define the magnetic field by taking this uj, taking the 4-dimensional Levy-Civitas symbol, dot with one index, and the rest of it will give you this. Now, this electric and this can be done for any antisymmetric tensor. These are the electric and magnetic components of that antisymmetric tensor defined with respect to a particular observer. And you can reconstruct Fij as in terms of this electric and magnetic. So it is E and B contain exactly the same information as Fik. Of course, Fik has only 6 independent components of freedom, and you might think that Ei and Bi 4 plus 4 has 8, but that is not true, because if I take Ui dot with Ei, you will find that that is 0 because of antisymmetry. And if I take a Ui dot of Bi, that will also be 0 because of this antisymmetry. So the E and B actually live in the hypersurface orthogonal to the U vector. So suppose you have a foliation and you have a bunch of observers with 4 velocity Ui, and you have the foliating surface which are orthogonal to that Ui. The E and B are spatial vectors, which is what it has to be. So there is a very natural definition you can have. And now you can go back, and in static space-time, when a observer is just sitting quietly at some point, okay, with a 4 velocity like this, you can ask what is this ER, which is essentially going to be Fi0, but it will either divided by n or multiplied by n depending on which components you use. So mathematically you have to be a little bit careful, because n can depend on position. So you need to take that into account. And you can write down the Maxwell's equations. Normally you would have got del square phi equals 0, and phi is just the A0 component. So this is just phi. So instead of del square phi, you will have a 1 by n sitting here. That is the only difference which happens when you are working in this curved space-time, and you have a charge density here. And if things are static, you only have to solve it. So what we need to do is to study the case of this is exactly this equation where n is replaced by the correct value for the Rindler frame. Divergence of this quantity is 4 pi rho, and rho is just a charge sitting here. And the electric field will be gradient of this. Again, this n factor comes in when you define it in the usual 3 vector notation. This is just a solution of a differential equation, so I won't go through that. It can be done. It is fairly straightforward. It's just a normal differential equation, and you can take it. So you find that this is the value for n. Okay, where r is the transverse plane distance, and this is as early as 1927. Whittaker solved this in 1927, and many others have written it in very many different ways. But I will show eventually a very elegant way of writing it, which fortunately nobody had spotted before. So I'll come to that. So this is just a Coulomb field. This is the Coulomb field of a particle which is sitting quietly at the origin in a Rindler frame. Okay, looks very complicated. That is because we are not looking at it in the proper way, and I will show you that is an enormously simple expression. And now you can go and compute the electric and magnetic fields, which are using this formula. So they also look complicated, but it has the standard kind of behavior. And one thing you can check is that when G goes to 0, this is Q by R and this is Qx by R cube, which is what you should expect. Fine. What is interesting is that once you know Ex and Ey, you can draw the field lines, or rather you can draw the equipotential surfaces. So the equipotential surfaces has this shape, and they get crowded near the horizon. This is a sort of standard result which happens in DR. What is interesting, and which is what I call key new result, is that this complicated expression I have written down is actually something quite simple. It can be actually thought of as just the Coulomb field Q by R, except that instead of taking R along a path, you have to take the affine parameter. Okay, so the affine parameter between these two points. Now, I want to emphasize this because this is, as I said, is a truly beautiful result, and we are quite kicked about it. So, let us look at the charge particle Q in normal space-time. It is sitting quietly there, and it has this field line, and we are interested in the electric field at this point. What do? You take this distance R, and you say that the potential is Q by R. Okay? Now, if I have replaced this by my light body, this R would have been the distance along the null geodesy. Okay? Now, distance along null geodesy you cannot define in the usual way because ds square will vanish. dt square minus dr square is 0. It will vanish. So the only way you can define a distance along a null geodesy is by the affine parameter. So a natural thing to do is to replace this Q by the affine parameter between the Q points A and B. Okay? What it tells you is that that is correct. You do that, and it is just the Coulomb field. So if you have a point charge at some point, the field at any other point is just Q by R, but you have to define R correctly. R should not be defined as the physical distance. R should be defined along the photon path, which means it is the affine parameter. So that complicated expression actually simplifies here. Now I will give you a very quick proof of this, and that proof is not too difficult, but let me just give you where it comes from. First thing is that there is a form for the Lenard-Vaisardt potential, which is just this. Now, unfortunately, this is not as well known as it should be. So, let me just explain to you where it comes from. It comes from the following. It's actually two steps. You take box AJ or AK is equal to JK, and you want to solve for this. How do you solve? You say that AK at a point x is going to be integral over d4x, a Green's function between x and y, times jk at y. Right? Now, when you evaluate this, what do you get? This AK is going to be integral over d4x. Let me put a proportionality. The Green's functions are going to be delta of s square between x and y, essentially with a theta function to tell you only forward integration. And what is going to be the charge? The charge is going to be the integral over proper time of a Dirac delta function of y minus the charge's trajectory, which let me call it z of tau. Z of tau? No, I don't know what I have used that. So z of tau. This is what you have. Okay, and this is the okay, this is d4 of y. D4 of y. D4 of y, s square depends on y. So this is going to essentially tell you that this s square evaluated between x minus y, the whole square is what picks up. And because of this Dirac delta function, that gets replaced by this quantity, and you end up getting integral d tau Dirac delta function of y minus that is the s square evaluated between these 2 points. That is the point which is x and the other point which is z of tau.
Paddy, please avoid that part. This is abstracted.
Okay, all right. So I am done. Actually, so this is the integral you need, and this integral you write as theta by ds square into ds square. And when you do the integral over a delta function with ds square, nothing happens. This theta by ds square is ds square by theta in the denominator. And of course, jk has a uk, which I convert. I mean, there is a uk here, for velocity uk of the charge. Jk has a this times uk, so that uk will see. That is exactly what you get here. This particular expression which I have written down, this UK comes from the chart. See, the only non-trivial thing is this d square by deta. So I am trying to explain where that d square by deta came from. D square by deta came from, okay, maybe I should write it on top. So let me write it on top. So what you will get is an integral over deta of delta of s square times u. Okay, this much should be obvious to anyone who has done 4-dimensional things. The only point is this you write as s square into dx. Okay, and you take this quantity and put it in the denominator as d square by deta. So integral over d square just takes care of the Dirac-Delta function, that just goes away, and you will pick up uk upon this d square. Rest of the factors comes from 4 pi and 2 and things like that. So what you get is this expression. Sorry. This expression for the fortress thing. Now you go and take a dot product of that with uk. What does that do? If the charge is at rest, uk has only the zeroth component, so this is a0, right? And that quantity is just 2q upon d square by deta, and you compute what is this this quantity explicitly, and you will find this is just the affine parameter. Okay, because I have given you the expression for the affine parameter. In other words, this ak uk is equal to q by lambda in flat space time when curvilinear coordinates. This is a nice picture. That ak uk is a generally covariant expression, and that can always be written as just q by lambda. The Coulomb's law has a very natural generalization in terms of the affine parameters of the null group, which has not been noticed for 5 decades or 6 decades. I mean, we haven't seen it in literature. So, unfortunately, it would have been lovely if I go and put a charged particle in a curved space-time, static curved space-time, and its field can be written in this form. The place where the proof fails in curved space-time is this. When you are doing this, what you have to do is that there is a, okay, this is your space-time, this is your charged particle trajectory, this is the source point, and this is the field point. Your 4 velocity sits here, and the vector potential sits here, and I want to compute ai_u1, which is a dot product of 2 vectors. Now I have a vector here, and I have a vector here, and I want to compute the dot product. You can do that only after I parallel transport this vector to here or this vector to here. As long as you are in flat space-time, the parallel transport is unique. You can use curvilinear coordinates, but parallel transport is unique in flat space-time, therefore I can compute it. Unfortunately, I do not know how to do this computation, except by parallel transporting in a curved space-time. But when I do the parallel transport, it will depend on in which path I went. Okay? As a result of which you don't have a natural generalization. So this is an open problem. If there is an elegant way of writing this result in curved space-time, static curved space-time, that would be lovely. Okay? That we have not been able to find, and many people I have talked to didn't know whether there is a generalization. So I'll just leave it. Okay, so what have we done? Going back to the picture, this is the uniformly accelerated charge, and here is this A and U. Oh, this is exactly what I drew. I didn't know that I have a pair here. Then I went to this frame in which it is at rest. This is the field point, and this A is equal to Q by lambda. So in the Rendeler frame, you can actually write it in terms of, I told you that the lambda is just tan h of dt, and you can write this down. And you can compute the retarded time by all these complicated calculations, and when you put it back, you end up getting the result, which Whittaker has found in 1957 or whatever. Okay. Now, a minor miracle is that if you go and compute the field line, in order to get that, you have to take the tangent vector ex by dy and write it as dx by dy, and you can take that ratio, and you can go and compute it. And you will find that they exactly match with the null geodesics. So the electric field lines in the Rindler prime completely coincide with the null geodesics in the Rindler prime. So not only that, you can write down the electric field of a charge which is sitting quietly in the Rindler prime as a Coulomb field q by lambda, with the distance being replaced by the affine parameter. You can also show that the electric field lines bend exactly the way the light bends. Okay. Now I want to go a bit further, and I wanted to show you a very interesting analogy between what we have been doing so far and the concept of radiation. After all, you have put a charge at rest on the table in a uniform gravitational field. This is like a uniformly accelerated charge. So as far as the inertial observer is concerned, there has to be a radiation. Is there a nice way of interpreting this radiation in the frame in which the charge is at rest? Because after all, the charge is at rest there and it has no dynamics in it. How do we interpret that? So that is what we wanted to show. In order to do that, we want to have a charge at an arbitrary point, not at origin. So you start with this metric and you can translate all this, but there is a redshift factor which you have to be careful about. Because when you move from point to point, the clock time is going to depend on where you are. But you can take care of that, and when you write it down, you find that the field of an arbitrary, suppose it is located at R0, then the electric field at R is given by this expression. This is a bit more complicated. Remember that we do not have translational symmetry. You see, in the flat space-time, in inertial coordinates, if you know the field at origin, then you know the field of a charge at any point, because you can just translate. But in a Rindler frame, the metric actually depends on one of the coordinates. So you do not have translational symmetry, so you have to rework the thing, which you can do. That is why it is slightly more complicated compared to what you would have got otherwise. Now, if you, what we are interested in is in weak gravitational field, so we take the limit of small g limit. Then it turns out that the equation which governs this is this Poisson equation with an extra correction term, and you can solve for that. So the vector potential, the scalar potential is just q upon r minus this. This is what you have formed, and it picks up a correction. It is almost like take the average value and g dot, and you do a redshift at the average value. Is one way of interpreting that. And you compute the electric field, and the electric field has this form. The electric field first has this L is the distance between r and r0, vectorial distance. So this is your Coulomb part, and that Coulomb part gets corrected by this. There is also another way of writing the same formula. There is one part here which is in the radial direction, and this is going to be important. There is one part which is in the radial direction. This is also in the radial direction. There is another part which is in the direction of the acceleration. This is completely independent of the location of 2 points, because usually when you have 2 points, you just get a radial field, but this is not going to be purely radial field. So you can also rewrite that, bringing this into account. This is the radial component of the field, but you also have another part here which depends exactly on this minus. This is what is going to actually give you radiation, and you can use this to find the force exerted by one charge on the other, and that is what is going to lead to a way of interpreting radiation in this particular coordinate system. So let me explain that. So this is just here, this room. There is a floor and there is a ceiling, and you have 2 strings, and you have, this is IIT JEE question. I mean, you put 2 charges here, and you have a gravity acting here, and if you put charges here, because of the repulsion of the charges, it will have this angle, and you have to compute that angle, etc. So what is going to happen is that this charge is exerting a force in this direction, Q1 Q2 by r square. This charge is exerted by a force Q1 Q2 by r square, and at some stage the tension in the string, gravity downwards, and this will all match. Now you ask, what is the total force exerted by these two? So the force here is radially this way, and this is radially this direction. So this tension in the string is essentially only going to support the weight, the component of the weight. This one is not going to contribute anything to that, because these two forces just compensate for it. The trouble is, we have not taken into account the effect of gravitational field on the electric field line. What did we do? We said that the electric field line between this charge and this charge are directed along the radial line here. But we just now found that is not true. There is another component in the g direction, right? There is a component along this and another component in the g direction. So if the radial lines are just like this, replace it by bulbs, and if the light rays were going like this picture is correct. But what is actually going to happen is that the electric field lines are arcs of the circle. Highly exaggerated, but they are the arcs of the circle. So the electric field lines do not go like this along a straight line, but the electric field line which is connecting one charge to another charge is like an arc of the circle. There are several field lines. We are interested in the field line which goes like this. That means there is a force in this direction, but there is also a force in this direction. So what is going to happen is that there is a horizontal force and a vertical force. Here is also there is a horizontal force and a vertical force. By symmetry, the horizontal forces add to 0, but the vertical forces do not. This, of course, net forces also don't add to 0, because the net forces horizontal goes to 0, but you have to add up. These are the forces in the g direction. So if you add, you will find that it is q1 q2 upon rc square times. This is again, I think, is an extraordinarily beautiful result. What it tells you is that this strings on the ceiling has to support a little bit more weight. See, these two forces downward is finally going to be compensated by these strings. So if I hook a spring balance here and look at its weight, if I do not take into account the bending of the electric field line, then I will get a value. But when I take into account the bending of the field lines, I get a different value. It has to support a greater weight. What is that weight? That weight has a beautiful expression. It is just, if you take this is essentially the electromagnetic mass of the system. The gravitational potential energy due to Q1 and Q2 is Q1 Q2 by R. You divide that energy by c square, you get an effective mass. So the electromagnetic field has an energy, it has an equivalent mass, and the two strings are actually going to support that weight. So the strings and the spring balance which you attach to it, unfortunately it is too tiny to check it out in the laboratory. If you attach a spring balance to it, that spring balance actually measures the weight of the electromagnetic energy. I mean, we do talk about E square over 8 pi as the electromagnetic energy density and all that, and if you compute it for this charge particle system, integrate over all space, you will find it is Q1 Q2 upon R. Of course, if you have two charges, you know the potential energy is just Q1 Q2 upon R, and it has an equivalent mass, and this problem tells you that that weight is actually felt. What is more important, this force, this is an extra force. So this charge is feeling an extra force which it normally would not have felt. And what is it like? Let us take one of the charges Q1. It is going to, what is the effective electric field it will see from this? It will be Q2G upon RC square. It is proportional to the other charge, that is understandable. It is proportional to the acceleration, that is strange, and it falls as 1 by R. This is exactly what radiation does. The radiation field of a charged particle is proportional to its acceleration, and it falls as 1 by R from the distance. So I have a charged particle going in some crazy direction. I look at it from an inertial frame. Then I will decompose the Leonard-Weichart potential into Coulombic field and the radiation field. And I will say that the other charge which is kept there feels the radiation field as well. But suppose I go to the frame in which this charge is at rest, then everything is static. How do I account for this radiation force which the other charge is feeling? You account for that radiation force by saying that the electrostatic energy in that frame has a weight, and the gravitational, it feels the gravity G which is acting downwards, because once you have gone to the rest frame, you have replaced the acceleration. This is the Einstein's elevator argument. You have replaced that acceleration by a gravitational field. So in that gravitational field, if you put an electrostatic field, the weight of the electrostatic field has to be felt by this system, and that is precisely what this leads to. Okay, so this appears as radiation in the inertial frame. Now you can actually work it out. This is all words and story, but you can actually work it out. You take this electric field in the Rindler frame, just transform it back to the inertial frame. This is coming from a very static potential. Nothing is dynamic, no time dependence, etc. Transform it back to the inertial frame, and you will find this. Okay. This is, of course, obtained to the lowest order. You can actually do it for arbitrary order. This is done in another paper, which is I think it is authored by Hamza Aron, and she has shown that using the exact field. But even if you do it at the lowest order, you can immediately pick up this term. Those of you who have done electromagnetic theory will immediately recognize this as the acceleration. This is the n cross n of acceleration divided by 1 by 4. Now all this is valid for an arbitrarily moving charge. Because remember our original philosophy, we are playing tricks with this uniformly accelerated charge. We are replacing an arbitrarily moving charge by a uniformly accelerated charge. But since the electric field at an arbitrary point depends only on the velocity and the acceleration, it will hold for any charge as long as this entire thing is computed at the return. So the message is that there is a very nice way of thinking about radiation which happens in the inertial frame, in the Rindler frame where the charge is at rest. And that electric field is just this. Sorry. That electric field is just this. You compare this electric field with this electric field. This is just obtained by a coordinate transformation. It's a complicated algebra, but it is just a coordinate transformation. Okay. So this electric field is very simple. It's a Coulomb field with a correction because the field lines bend due to gravity. That field transforms back into the inertial frame as radiation. So the radiation is nothing but gravity's effort to sort of counter the electrostatic energy at every point. It has to support that electrostatic energy, and in that process it has to adjust the field lines in a particular way, and that is how this comes. So just to conclude, if you take the field of a uniformly accelerated charge, if you know that, from that you can find the field of an arbitrarily moving charge. Okay, that is something which you need to grasp, because everything which we have done gives you the field of an arbitrarily moving charge, the full Lenard-Vaishart potential. Okay, and the uniformly accelerated motion was only used as a crutch. And the potential is strictly Coulombian with just q by lambda, where lambda is just the affine parameter in that. And the electric field lines follow the null geodesics, which is another nice result, that it just goes along with the null geodesics. And the gravity supports the electrostatic energy. The electrostatic energy is Q1 Q2 upon R divided by c square is the effective mass. This is the mg. This much of force will be supported by the gravity. If I hang from the ceiling 2 charge particle and put this, the tension on the string will exactly support it. And this is what a freely falling observer will see in the inertial frame as radiation. So, okay, this is in case people want to look at this further, because there are some open questions there. The one question is whether the null geodesics and the electric fields in this generalize to arbitrary curved spacetime, arbitrary static curved spacetime. For example, if you have a charged particle in the short-sized spacetime, its potential is known. In fact, can be written down in terms of elementary functions. I mean, there is nothing complicated. You can solve for that. And this potential, whether it can be interpreted in some way as essentially coming from this kind of AIQI, parallel transported from one point to one point, would be very nice. So there must be a parallel transporting matrix which is going to give some extra correction terms, etc. We have not done that, and that looks interesting. Now, in these cases, is it Coulombian? My guess is it is not, but it is going to be Coulombian with a correction, and that correction needs to be determined. So the question is whether in these spacetimes you can again interpret gravity as supporting the weight of the charge particle. That would be very interesting. That is electrostatics in a curved geometry. Another question which we have not looked at, which may be somewhat easier to tackle if anyone is interested, is what happens in rotating frame. See, Rindler is a uniform acceleration in a linear direction. Suppose I have a charge which is going around in a circuit, is going to emit synchrotron radiation. Now I can go to the frame in which the charge particle is at rest. I can write down the metric there. Everything is static. I should be able to solve the electrostatic equation, find the potential and transform that. So I should be able to obtain explicit synchrotron radiation with all its complications by this method, and that would be interesting to see, but we have not done it. These are some references if you want to look at it. This weight that Q1 Q2 upon RC square can be thought of as the weight, but not the connection with the radiation. That is there in an old paper by Fermi. Then this is Whittaker is the one who originally obtained this result. These guys had this null geodesics being a curved path, but somehow all these people failed to put all of them together, and that is why we found an issue where we do. Thank you. Questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you go back, the starting,
Okay.
while it transforms the arbitrarily moving
Yeah.
particles to
Rindler frame and things like that. Yeah, let us get there.
While the particles move in a straight line.
Okay, so this would be that, yeah. Right. Okay.
Now, you may doubt that the curvature of the
Yeah.
path of the particle
Yes.
is due to non-gravitational orbit.
Yes. Somebody is accelerating. That's correct. Correct.
Then how can we find an accelerated state?
Which will do this? Oh, that is trivial. Okay, so let me explain that. There is some guy who is pushing the charge, okay, which could be any non-gravitational force. But once you have given me the trajectory, the field here does not depend on what is pushing the charge. So let us make that clear. Suppose I have a charge particle which is moving along this trajectory, accelerated trajectory, and that acceleration is arising out of, let us say, a magnetic field. The acceleration could be arise out of mechanical forces. The acceleration could be arising out of an electric field. I don't care. But once this trajectory is specified, the field here is going to be the same. The field here only depends on what this trajectory is, not what the accelerating source is. Therefore, once you have given me this red curve, I can reduce the problem to kinematics and ask what is the frame in which this red curve becomes straight. So that is the reason, because there is a clear distinction between the source of acceleration and once that trajectory has been specified, the field coming from it. That is why you can always find it. Any other?
Instead of say Coulomb type of interaction, if you have any power type where you are mapping.
Right, right.
And also can you rethink the
Yeah. So normally we don't think in terms of if I have one can actually do that by saying add a mass here. Suppose you add a mass to the photon, then instead of 1 by r it will fall as e to the minus lambda r. Now if you assume everything else works through, and if this equation is true, then you can repeat all the analysis and you will get a e to the minus lambda r. The problem with this is the moment you add a mass to the photon, gauge invariance goes for atoms. So you don't have a natural definitions of electromagnetic field, gauge invariant construct, etc. That is why people don't do that. But algebraically, same equations have same solution, so it will work.
then the affine parameter that will be replaced by the
Affine parameter will be replaced by the proper pair. That is what will happen.
Curiosity, and may not be that good question, but see, this is a general Fourier transformation that
Right.
we wrote. Arbitrary moving charge and the charge at rest.
Right.
Two tests.
Yeah.
Suppose I have a on the left hand side, a right hand side. If I start with a again moving charge,
Okay.
is there any kind of current opposite current should be there in that side also?
That is, you have two charge points.
Yes.
Okay.
And then you reverse this,
Mhm.
and then this. And then what will be the nature of the curve in the left hand side? Because the question that pops into mind, basically, if I take the linear space, if I complexify this thing, I can actually play around with some twisted level.
Right.
So that's up to you.
Yeah, but at the level at which I am working, it would not change anything because it is because the theory is linear. Because theory is linear, if I have n charges, I do it for each charge, and when I look at charges one at a time, and I bring this charge to rest, calculate the field, then I take the next charge. When this charge goes to rest, the other charge will be doing something crazy. Now I go to another frame in which the other charge is at rest, then find the field, and I add the field. So I don't think something deep will come out. Because the theory is linear and it doesn't have too much structure. Yeah.
Okay, you can generalize these things to dions also. Charges
Dion.
both.
Yes, yes. The same idea should work. I mean, whenever you have the, as I said, same equations, you will get the same solutions, and all these ideas can be applied. You can go to the rest frame and then work everything out and go backwards. Yes. Yeah.
Can you show that slide where you have this transformation with the matrix?
The metric for the Rendler frame.
Right. So where you have this lapse.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, this matrix, I mean, that how it looks like matrix of hyperbolic geometry.
Yeah, it is not quite the hyperbolic geometry. See, the idea is that if you take this and you take x is equal to constant, then you immediately know that 1 plus gx the whole square minus g square t square the whole square is going to be 1 plus gx the whole square. So x is equal to constant lines are hyperbolas. That part is true. But actually this is conformal to Poincare plane, Poincare half plane. Mathematically, this is conformal to Poincare half plane.
So if that is conformal to the half plane, then I think the geodesics
Are circles.
are circles.
Exactly. That is why the geodesics are circles. And in fact, in our paper, we say that if you are an expert, it is 2 lines. I only have to tell you that this is conformal to Poincare half plane. Yeah, but then somebody has to prove that Poincare half plane has circles as the geodesics. Okay.
No, I was just wondering that because we have
That is
geometrical
Yeah,
interpretation.
yeah. This is, because it is conformal to Poincare half plane, they are circles and yeah, we explicitly mentioned it in the paper. But then we say that if you are not an expert, here is the proof. Okay.
If there are no further questions or comments, I mean, let's thank the speaker once again. And, we'll meet at
2:30.
At 2:30, please don't be